What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So last week, Nintendo released Everybody 1-2 Switch, and it didn't exactly light the internet on fire. In fact, there's one review for it currently, and Nintendo seems to have already moved on from it completely. But wouldn't you know it, one aspect of the game is being exploited by the internet being, well, the internet, and it may have actually backfired on Nintendo. We'll go over all of that, though, here today. Also, we are going to be talking about an interesting leak that appears to have hit Sony when it comes to the Last of Us franchise, whether that's The Last of Us Part 3 or maybe Last of Us Factions. And we'll also be talking about Banjo Kazooie. Fans of the series are very hopeful for some sort of revival of the franchise. However, some of the original developers aren't exactly holding their breath. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're going to start today with the UK sales charts, but one specific part of it showing that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has climbed its way back to the top spot. We can see this posted up by Christopher Dring on Twitter, saying Zelda sales up 18% is back at #1 in the UK box charts, replacing Final Fantasy, which is down 78%. AEW is the highest new entry at #3, sales 40% lower than WW2K23, which, as pointed out by Christopher Dring, is not bad. And yeah, I mean, I would say so. A new entry just in general for wrestling, going up against a more storied franchise, that's not too bad. But Zelda back to the #1 spot with sales climbing 18% is just incredibly impressive for this franchise. I mean, we knew Tears of the Kingdom was going to be big, but this just continues to roll along with legs for these sales that are very impressive in general. But Final Fantasy down 78%. I mean, sales typically do have a pretty large drop off the second week, and it's usually can it then hold about that amount going forward to continue accumulating sales. And we'll see with Final Fantasy 16, because that is how Square and even Sony seem to be positioning this, something that will sell alongside of PlayStation 5s for the long run. Also, Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown appears to once again have been delayed, and this game has been delayed a couple of times now, but as we can see pointed out, this was in the lineup for 2023 from the parent company Nacon, and we can see Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown now being positioned for that Q1 2024 release, whereas originally it was supposed to come out in like the fall of 2023. So essentially being pushed maybe 4 or 5 months or so. And it's hard to say with this title exactly just what we're going to get out of it with all these delays. And I mean, I'd like this game just to come out and be good and have a return of the Test Drive franchise, but at least it doesn't seem like they're willing to just push it out the door half-baked, and they'll continue delaying it as they need to. But I guess at this point, if you're looking forward to it this fall, you're gonna have to push your expectations back about 4 or 5 months. I would say look for this one maybe even in March. Oh, and last year we had talked about basically an extended warranty service that Nintendo was offering in Japan for your Switch, where you pay like a monthly or even a yearly fee, and you can have your Switch replaced up to 6 times. Basically no questions asked. I guess comparable to something like Apple Care. Well, it looks like this either was too costly for Nintendo or no one was really using it, because this was posted up over on Nintendo's website. Wide care for Nintendo Switch, notice of new subscription acceptance and termination of contract renewal. That's right, they're basically done with this. So you'll be looking at August 31st, where they will no longer be taking any new subscriptions for this. And July 14th, they will stop accepting any kind of changes to monthly plans or annual plans for current subscriptions. So hard to say one way or the other. It could have been costing Nintendo a lot of money, and they were like, wow, the numbers don't add up here because people keep replacing their Switch, or, as I mentioned, no one was really using it. Or who knows, maybe they're getting things set up for their next device after running what was basically a trial run here for about a year. We'll see. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Everybody 1-2 Switch. This came out last Friday, and it was positioned as a follow-up to 1-2 Switch, that being a launch title for the device, and it sold pretty well. A lot of that, I'm sure, had to do with them pushing it as a big launch title and a way to show off what the Switch can do with the IR sensor, the Joy-Cons, the HD Rumble, and so on there. But Everybody 1-2 Switch was panned apparently internally by Nintendo employees. They made fun of it. They called it all kinds of crazy names. But now that the game is out, people are certainly taking advantage of this title in a different way than I think people were expecting. So the game itself, $30, and you could play up to 100 people, but we know 100 Joy-Cons can't connect to the system, and you're probably not going to pass around a Joy-Con 100 times. Well, in order to make this work, you would use your mobile phone, connect to it, and you're off and running. But apparently, you can use pictures as a profile in the game, and there's no content filter on it. This was pointed out, we can see, by Nintendo World Report. It says everybody 1-2 Switch includes option for uploading pictures without content filters. So you can kind of guess what's being alluded to here. There's a nice little picture that's shown by Nintendo World Report as an example, with a bunch of little bubbles kind of around with names. Well, fill in the blanks with those bubbles of, we'll say, more offensive images, and it's the internet. The internet's gonna internet, so yeah, that's obviously happening at this time, especially on Twitch streams, as a way seemingly to almost ban people because of some of the images that are just kind of popping up. And it doesn't even necessarily show you immediately as a game is starting. It kind of just shows the bubbles in order, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's an image that is not exactly family friendly, or what Nintendo is trying to get at here with everybody 1-2 Switch. Kind of reminds me of what would happen with Uno back in the day on the Xbox 360. Microsoft gave you this little webcam looking thing, and the idea, I guess, was to be more community driven, and well, people were driven to doing other things with their camera, we'll say. Now, we do know Nintendo has worked hard to kind of curate the experience with the Switch. You can't even message each other with just text on your friends list. So you see this, and that's like 0 to 100 immediately. And it also kind of reminds me of what was going on with PictoChat or something with the 3DS, and Nintendo cut that down real quick. That a little more personal though, because people were just sending messages and stuff between different systems. This being more of a party setting where one person out of the 100 can technically ruin it for everyone. So I don't know if Nintendo has a way to figure this out or mitigate some of the risk that's now involved here with everybody 1-2 Switch. And it also makes me wonder if this was necessarily worth them even releasing at this point. It's not exactly lighting up like review boards, as I think there's 1 or 2 reviews, and it's in the 60s at this time. And it sounded like for a while they were just gonna leave it on the cutting room floor, but no, everybody 1-2 Switch is now out, and yeah, people are having a lot of fun with it, but not really the fun I think we were expecting. Next up, let's talk about The Last of Us Part 3, or at least some information that's getting out there around the follow-up to Last of Us Part 2. Whether that's this Last of Us Factions game that sounds kind of like it's in development limbo, or legitimately the big follow-up title that we assume to be Last of Us Part 3. This is posted up over on Forbes, and they say, in any case, according to leaker Daniel, RPK, 5 new named characters are being introduced in Part 3. These are a group of scavengers using a Victorian house as their base of operations. They include Lucas, Mason, Val, Ezra, and Gracie. Sounds like they're kind of building this up, so there'll be a bit of a tug of war in terms of leadership around the group, and they'll basically have kind of this community, I guess, that's built up here in the post-apocalyptic city, and they'll, I guess, fight back and forth in general for control and internal politics, all these sort of things. But according to this person, that major filming is happening this year. So they're doing, I assume, motion capture for the game. And if you remember, Naughty Dog has had a lot of issues with just leaks in general in the past. I mean, Last of Us Part 2 was... that was infamous for some of the stuff that got out there and lit the internet on fire. I will say, though, in a lot of this information that's getting out there through these leaks, nothing is mentioned of Abby from Last of Us Part 2, which is interesting because it sort of felt like they were lining all this up so that you would get a follow-up in terms of the story for Ellie and Abby as they, of course, go their separate ways. I'm curious if they are involved in this in any way. It sounded like Ellie would still have some sort of involvement. Hard to say with Abby, but I do like the idea of them, instead of focusing on characters we already know about, going off and introducing new characters that can have their own storylines and maybe build something somewhat fresh, but still in that same world and universe. Now, as I mentioned, it's possible that this is information around The Last of Us Factions, and it sounds like that multiplayer game is having some issues in development in terms of finding its way in the live service world. So this could be stuff that we don't actually see for quite a while either way, right? Last of Us Part 3 could come out towards the end of this PlayStation 5 generation with how long it takes to make some of these different games. But either way, I guess eventually Naughty Dog will have to show up with something, and Last of Us Part 3 does at least make the most sense, especially if Sony, which we've seen the budget's now $220 million or so for Last of Us Part 2, which is only going to go up from there. If they want to play it safe, they'll probably go with a sequel to that franchise and build on it, maybe with new characters that can then also break away and maybe have their own games after that. But there we have it. It seems like some information getting out there around Last of Us Part 3 or Last of Us Factions, but we'll see what Naughty Dog has for us, hopefully sometime next year. Next up, let's talk about Banjo Kazooie, and another reason that you'll probably feel pretty old today, because what happened was an interview marking the 25th anniversary for Banjo-Kazooie. That's right, 25 years ago, you may have been really excited to hear about this game coming out for the Nintendo 64, but there has been questions around the idea of Microsoft maybe reviving the franchise, especially after seeing the reception that Banjo got when he was unveiled for Smash Bros. Ultimate. I mean, it was massive, massive excitement online. You feel like you take advantage of that if you're Microsoft. Well, according to Grant Kirkhope, who's the original composer for Banjo and Kazooie, doesn't exactly believe that it's something that would come together very easily. In fact, we can see this posted up on VGC, where this from Grant Kirkhope saying, "I feel like you'd have to get a team with the humor that we had back then. That's hard to replicate. I think Rare would be open to somebody if they found the right team, but I don't feel like that team exists. Also, I'm not convinced the audience is there either." Sutherland added, I would hope that somebody is going to bring out something, some kind of sequel or next in-line game, at least before a point where I can still remember that the first one existed, but hopefully sooner." Now, there were some good points made in this overall talk and reflection on Banjo-Kazooie, one being is a lot different back then. One person mentioned I would stay late, it would just be me, and I'd be able to get a lot done. That's not really happening now with how much things have advanced when it comes to the scope and development and the teams and the budget. That's the biggest thing here is, would Microsoft be willing to even take a chance on Banjo-Kazooie, something like that 3D platformer working now, as opposed to in the early 2000s when it would have been probably a lot easier to greenlight that? Well, in my mind, if Microsoft can indeed find a team that can come together and have a similar feel of Banjo-Kazooie, especially on the humor side and some of the different characters, it would make sense for them because of Game Pass, where they are trying to have a large variety of titles being offered. I don't even think they should go back and remake the first one or even Tooie or anything like that. I feel like you go back and you make a brand new title and you try to do it in-house if possible. To me, it feels like the 3D platformer still works, as I see things like Mario Odyssey do really, really well. The other part to this is I don't necessarily think Banjo needs a massive AAA budget. You could probably do something closer to the size of Hi-Fi Rush, and fans would get a kick out of it, and it would work to add that variety into Game Pass. It worked really well there with Hi-Fi Rush, where they announced they had over 2 million players, and they seemed pretty happy with that. So I think if you do something on that level, see where you stand, and then maybe you can invest more, sure, I would go that route. But it really does come down to if Microsoft can bring together people who can create a new game in the Banjo series, similar to how people keep asking them to do a Killer Instinct game. They got to find the people to be able to do it in the first place. They've admitted that completely in interviews. So here's hoping, yes, they can find someone to do Killer Instinct, but that they can definitely find someone to do Banjo, because I definitely think there's a place for that style game now in 2023 and beyond. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about PlayStation Mobile, which is Sony's big push right now to try to bring some of their larger franchises, say like God of War, to the mobile phone space. And it makes sense to do this because of how much money flows through that sector. It is massive, billions and billions of dollars. Microsoft has apparently said that most of the reason they're buying Activision Blizzard, or at least attempting to, is because of the mobile offerings that King brings to the table. Oh yeah, and there's also Call of Duty. That's great too. But in this case, Sony kind of sees a big shift here, and they're working to pursue this. But doesn't seem like things have been going the smoothest right now. We can see posted up over on mobilegamer.biz saying the managing director, Mikhail Katoff, has announced on LinkedIn he is leaving Savage Game Studios. Now, Savage Game Studios was purchased by Sony and PlayStation and brought in-house under the PlayStation Studios umbrella in order to develop these different titles for mobile phones. But now seeing another person actually leaving Savage Game Studios is starting to bring up questions around how things are actually going over there. And really, we haven't seen anything come out of PlayStation Mobile and Savage Games yet. The purchase was made, not too long ago now, so it'll take some time to get things rolling along there. But when you see some of the talent, especially the top level talent, kind of departing, it sort of reminds me of what was happening with Deviation Games, and everyone figured things were fine, and now it looks like Sony has just kind of canceled that contract completely and just crushed Deviation. So the difference here, obviously, is that Savage Game Studios is just part of PlayStation after they made that purchase. So, not the best news coming out of PlayStation Mobile at this time with some of these people leaving. But again, we need to see what their first game is going to look like when they move maybe a new title from the God of War franchise or even Ratchet and Clank over to mobile devices. And here's hoping they're ready to announce that sooner rather than later to bring some confidence to PlayStation Mobile and that arm. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I asked, did you pick up Everybody 1-2 Switch? 97% say no. 3% say, hey, this might be the out for Nintendo to just not care because no one's playing Everybody 1-2 Switch in a month or so. I mean, seriously, 3% of people picked this game up. It just might be forgotten about, and Nintendo won't even have to deal with any of this stuff. I mean, really, someone has to have the game, and then someone else has to use their phone to play it with them. So, I don't know, maybe Nintendo just looks the other way and goes, hey, you know what? In a month, 2 months, no one's gonna care. Super Mario RPG is coming up. Mario Wonder. Who's gonna be playing Everybody 1-2 Switch and uploading those kind of pictures? We'll forget about it, don't worry. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from TV saying, imagine being a good game developer, having the frustrating time developing Gollum because executives are the bad team, then getting laid off and now looking for a job and have to explain you have worked developing Gollum. Yeah, I've always wanted to ask a developer about that, who's been involved with one of these projects, because some of them know, like, they're looking at what they're working on. They might have been, like, responsible for parts of it that are bad. There could be an environmental artist who is doing a genuinely good job on Cave Number 4 or something, right? And they're doing a lot of the texture work, and they're looking over and they're thinking, that movement looks really bad. The gameplay loop does not seem that interesting. This isn't going to go over well, but they're sitting there going along with it, and then they get to the end and they're like, okay, well, that was not necessarily a waste of time, but it didn't lead me where I would have liked to have gone with another project coming up or something. So I'd be curious to see how that affects them, especially in development, because you definitely want a project to be interesting to the different developers to be working on. Otherwise, they might just say, you know what, I'm not gonna be super passionate about this because I kind of see the writing on the wall. At least that's just the attitude I figured would kind of be shared. You got to keep that studio morale up, but that's certainly a conversation I'd like to have with someone who's gone through with that on the developing floor. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Was the Everybody 1-2 Switch situation Nintendo's found themselves in? You think they're gonna do anything about it, respond in any way, or will they treat it like that Pokemon patch and just hope that everyone's mostly forgotten about it? And then also, what about Last of Us Part 3 or Factions? You like the idea of Naughty Dog shifting focus over to a new group of characters? And then Banjo Kazooie. Is there a place for this franchise in gaming right now in 2023? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.